Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I just want to randomly talk about a topic that isn't new. It's actually been happening for a very long time when it comes to video games, and that's the aspect of every time there's a video game and then there's a direct sequel to said video game, there's always that situation of said character or characters that return in that sequel will just magically lose everything they've ever gained. Like, it's not, like I said, this isn't a new subject. It happens quite a lot. I think it's kind of like a running, I don't know the cliche, but it's just a running thing in video games. Now, does it happen to every video game? No, but more often than not, when there's a sequel or something, they're always kind of, there's a good chance something like that's going to happen. And not just gameplay wise, but even story wise. It's like, oh yeah, your character just got nerfed. It's like, oh, this character was like level 50 in the previous game. It's like, oh well, they're back to level 1 and every ability they've ever known is gone. I say because it still persists to even today. Like, even take something like Kingdom Hearts 3. There was people theorizing about, like, okay, so how is Sora going to lose every ability he gained in the previous games? I mean, because since I'm on the topic of Kingdom Hearts, I mean, let's use that for example, because every subsequent game something happens. I mean, you can rationalize it to certain extents. Like, from 1 to Chain of Memories, it's like, well, all your abilities were taken, you had to start using cards to fight. And even outside of that, it's like, well, to be fair, from Chain of Memories to Kingdom Hearts 2, all your powers existed in the shape of cards, and of course, like, the moment you leave Castle Oblivion, that doesn't apply anymore. Plus, Sora, Donald, and Goofy were in a slumber for like a year, so there's that. And even Kingdom Hearts 2 to Dream Drop Distance makes sense too, because it's like, well, you're playing a dream version of Sora and Riku, and these dream versions of them are like them from the very beginning, like, of the series. So it's like, so that's understandable as well. This is just coming from me, from the mindset of JRPGs, like, you know, just because that's kind of not really my bread and butter. Like, I'd like to think it's my bread and butter, but I'm sure there's plenty wide range of JRPGs I've never played. But this is all based on my own experience. So, my question is, why do you think, like, video games are designed like that? At the moment the sequel happens, like, you have to be nerfed? My only guess is that by starting you at the beginning, it's a lot easier to do that in a relative scale than in the middle. I guess it's because it's like, well, this is a new adventure, so we got to start you from scratch. Either because it's like those abilities you once had, we feel like they don't work as well in this system, but obviously some games still bring those set abilities back, but maybe they're modified. I'm curious. I guess maybe just because it's a lot easier for a player to handle, just in case, like, okay, this player didn't play the first game, so now they're coming into the second one for whatever reason. It's like, okay, we want to make it so it's accessible to everyone, so it starts from the beginning. Like, maybe it's some kind of programming scale of being like, well, because if we started it in the middle and like in a sequel, like, oh, you were this strong in the first game and we kept you that strong in the second game, we'd have to program the game to like be able to keep up with that scale. I don't know whether that's harder. And do note that this is just me just randomly like talking. Like, I don't know anything. It is something I probably, I'd very much like to look into afterwards, kind of do a different video about it. But this is me, knowing nothing at this point in time and just talking about it. I guess just like starting at level 1 is universal is what I'm trying to get at, and maybe that's a lot easier even when it comes to sequels. I mean, certain games I feel like handle it very well. Once again, kind of using JRPGs for example, is the dot hack games, like especially like the originals as well as GU. Like, no matter how strong you got in the first game, like the previous games, like the subsequent sequels would carry over your strength. That was just kind of like, and they were my first experience with that with video games, like an aspect of like you carrying over your stuff, like your items, your weapons, your relationships with characters. I mean, obviously they kind of do a little thing with dot hack where it's like, well, the fact of the matter is, even if you start at the next game, they'll give you a rough like average level of like, okay, so if you never played the first one, you just want to start in a new file, well, this is roughly what your equipment and your party would look like. But I think that applies a little differently for those games because they're JRPGs designed to feel like MMO JRPGs, so maybe that kind of puts them in a different category as most games, especially when it comes to sequels. I don't know, like, maybe that's just something different. But another example would be, I don't know if this applies to all of the Legend of Heroes series because I'm only slightly familiar with one series, and that's Trail of Cold Steel. They do a very interesting thing with that game of like your characters don't get nerfed. To a certain extent they do, because like no matter how powerful you got in the first game, when you start the second game you're relatively a little weaker, because it's like, well, even if you manage to get like level 50 in the first game, I think you will always start like roughly level 40 in the subsequent sequel. But when it comes to like storyline wise as well as gameplay wise, like you still have all the skills that you had before, and your relationships, much like your levels with like the characters, your S-links and stuff like that, kind of carry over to a certain extent. They kind of average out a little bit. It's kind of a middle ground, like I was talking about, like, you know. So I think it's just kind of interesting because there are examples of games like that that are like, no, you don't completely start over. We nerfed you a little bit so you don't come in as too powerful. I guess they designed the game to like, so once again, so like if anyone just comes into it, it's like you can start off like not having to worry about enemies being like ridiculously strong. I don't know, maybe like the battle systems aren't scaled to necessarily reflect that. It's like, oh, the moment you come in at like level 100 in a game, it's like, well, the fact of the matter is the program is like created to make it, you know, to scale with you. So if you started the game off at 100, you're gonna be fighting 100 level enemies. And I guess it'd be harder to kind of reprogram a system to be like, okay, treat level 100 like level 1 for this particular game, especially if it's a game where it's the sequel, the engine is, you know, like I said, in like the example of Trails of Cold Steel, like I'm pretty sure it's the same engine being used. So it's like all that programming is already there, you know, the assets are already built and designed in a certain sense. So if they, maybe, you know, each game, like maybe it's a lot easier just to start from scratch rather than, you know, hey, you need to, you know, it's that whole, that level up, that starting from the bottom and rising to the top aspect. Maybe that's just a thing that you always want your players to always feel that, you know, feel that need to get stronger again. Because if you start off the same strength, start off like peak, then obviously it's not going to be fun because you're going to be like, well, I'm at the strongest I can possibly be. But obviously that's why there's the aspect of like, you know, raising the level cap in a sequel or something like that. Like I don't know, like all of this is just randomly my thoughts on the whole subject. I am no expert, like I said. I will kind of have to do a little more research on my own end to kind of possibly get an answer to that. But it's just something fascinating, I think. Like I said, it's a common thing. It's not like anyone in particular is guilty of that. You know, it's just something that everyone does. One of my favorite games, Shadow Hearts, does it. I mean, the main character, Yuri, he has all these different fusion forms. But storyline-wise, they nerfed him a little bit just because, you know, when you build Yuri back up, it's like, oh, it's an excuse to give him new fusion forms and new abilities. So I'm sure that's a contributing factor in the whole equation as well. My question to you is, what is your thoughts about the whole subject? I mean, if you've heavily researched it, let me know. Also, let me know some games that you feel like fall under that same category, or you feel like you know some games that don't. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.